AstroMaps. I think all of you are familiar with AstroMaps. It's an idea that was introduced by Jim Lewis decades ago, and Jim called them astrocartography maps. And some astrologers are very loyal to the methods that Jim Lewis developed. However, Jim saw relocational astrology and astromaps as an evolving system. Here's a quote from something he wrote, and I give the website address here at the bottom where this quote is from. He wrote, "Midpoints, another tentative idea that a location exactly equidistant from two astrocartography lines as measured along the line of latitude at which the place exists will experience a midpoint blended influence of two lines in question." Don't worry about the technical details of what he wrote. Basically, he said midpoints going halfway in between two lines might be very important. I'm mentioning this because this is what we're going to talk about today. It's an idea that Jim Lewis already had in mind and was curious about. And now, many decades later, we are convinced that midpoints are extremely powerful and will improve your work with relocational astrology if you include them in your astromap. So as I have here on this slide, not only are midpoints and astromaps important as Jim Lewis suspected that they might be, but they are extremely important. That's what I'm suggesting. Now, let's dig into this. Putting midpoints in your astromap, is it really going to help? Is it really so totally awesomely cool as I'm describing? Well, let's think about a way to evaluate this. Think about places that you are drawn to. What is it that draws you to the place? What does that place mean to you? So maybe you're drawn to San Francisco or London or Paris. What is it about that place? Why is it important to you? Is it like a spiritual inspiration? Is it the artistic culture? Is it the kind of people that are there? Is it the mood and ambiance, the style? What is it that draws you there? Why is it important to you? Does it feel romantic? Does it just feel homey? What is it about that place? What is your connection to it? That's my first question. So you can think to yourself some places that resonate for you in some way. Not that it's the perfect place or great in every way, but it makes a connection with you. And if you have done relocational astrology, are you able to really see that using the techniques that you currently use? Are you able to sense these specific kinds of connections you have to that place? And what I'm proposing is that if you include midpoints in your astromaps, you will see a lot more of why those special places are special for you and exactly the connection they make for you. Now, I'm going to give an example from my own chart of how midpoints help describe my connection to certain places, and then I'm going to describe it with a famous person. So I'm going to give two examples, my own chart and a famous person. And when I do the famous person, I'll add some additional ideas. So here's an example. I live in North Florida in a town called Gainesville, Florida. I was drawn here like a magnet in September 1972. I don't know, I was traveling down southeast United States and everybody told me to come here and I just couldn't leave. Something about this particular area drew me into it. And a lot happened as soon as I got here, way back in 1972. So I'm old, right? And back in 1972, I had just finished college. I came down here and a lot happened. I was initiated into my spiritual practice. It's where I discovered astrology. And very shortly after I got here, I started my yoga and meditation practice, became fanatically obsessed with astrology. And also, interestingly, I became popular on the local radio, television, and the local newspaper. I didn't have this in mind. It just kind of happened. And then I started making connections with leading astrologers when I was just like a baby in astrology. People like Dane Rudger, Mark Emmon Jones, Charles Jane. I had mail correspondence with them. I moved away from Gainesville for periods of time, but I always came back and I still live here. What is it that has kept me here for nearly 50 years? Now, I've been drawn elsewhere. It's not like Gainesville is like the place. And this summer, my wife and I are looking at places to live half the year in the suburbs south of Seattle. So it's not that Gainesville is like numero uno and I never want to go anywhere else. Now, so here's an astro map. I was born here in New York, Long Island, New York, and I drew a circle around it. And I moved and I put here, born here. So that's where I started. And then I moved, spent like my whole adult life here in North Florida. And I will also be spending more time in the Seattle, Washington area. Now here's an astromap. An astromap shows, as you probably already know, where planets are angular in the relocated chart. So if I move to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I would have Pluto opposition my relocated ascendant. I'm not sure I want to do that, but that's what would happen. Or if I move to Los Angeles, I'd have Jupiter conjunct the ascendant. So in your relocated chart, the planet positions do not change, but the house cusps change. And the astromap is a fantastic way to see where you would have a planet angular. This was the idea Jim Lewis came up with, to make a map to show you where the planets are angular. Now, interestingly, Gainesville, which has played a huge part in my life, has no lines going through it. And the yellow lines are to the ascendant and they're curved, and the vertical red lines are to the midheaven. So for example, I have Mercury opposition the midheaven coming down here through the west side east of Phoenix, Arizona, and so on. Okay, so that's the astromap. And there it is, just nice and simple without those lines drawn on it. Now, some of you may know that the way Jim Lewis did his astromaps were called in mundo. It's not the normal way we do astrology. And I'm not going to go into all the details of in mundo, but with the in mundo, the lines move a little bit, particularly the Pluto line can move a lot. And you can see that instead of going through Albuquerque, New Mexico, it's much further east. And these two lines intersect in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is probably one of the few states I've never been to, but anyway, so you get a similar map if you do in mundo or if you do the normal zodiac longitude. I'll talk more about that in a minute. What I'm doing here is I'm clearing away some questions, issues, terminology that you may have heard so that we can focus on this midpoint. Now here is the same astromap for me, and I've added in aspects. And I'm doing it in zodiac longitude, not the in mundo way that Jim Lewis did. I just showed you an example of that. But here we're doing it in normal astrology way, in zodiac longitude. And we don't have to do just conjunctions. I put aspects in. So for example, I have Mercury trine the ascendant, this yellow line coming through San Francisco, and so on. So you can put aspect lines in here. Here's a kind of nice one, Sun sextile the ascendant coming east of Chicago. So you can put any aspects in there. You don't have to just do conjunctions. Still nothing in Florida. The whole state of Florida has nothing. Over here in Seattle, there are some lines coming close to Seattle. In fact, Seattle, using normal astrocartography, is pretty wonderful. Venus opposition the midheaven, west of Seattle, Venus trine the ascendant, also a little west and north of Seattle. So again, the yellow curved lines are to the ascendant, the red vertical are to the midheaven, two Venus lines, but nothing here in Florida where I actually have spent a huge amount of time, and it was drawn here, and it's an important place for me. Okay, now we put in the midpoints. When we put in the midpoints, this area in Seattle is now loaded with stuff, not only the two Venus lines, but all kinds of midpoints. But look at Florida. So the midpoint lines come almost right through where I live. I put a white circle here for where I live. And on the east side of where I've lived for half a century is Saturn slash Neptune. Slash means midpoint. People sometimes use slashes kind of liberally, but in the old midpoint system, slash meant midpoint. So Saturn slash Neptune means that midpoint of Saturn and Neptune goes just east of Gainesville, Florida, where I've lived and still live. And its opposition means it's opposition the ascendant, or in other words, on the 7th house cusp. And the Sun Jupiter midpoint is conjunct the ascendant. I happen to have two midpoints that are right smack on top of each other, going right through this area. And what I'm telling you is that if you add midpoints to your AstroMaps, get ready to be shocked. Things that are not showing up at all, boom, amazing, there they are.